Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. The weather is warming up in my neck of the woods, and so is my writing pace, because for the first time in forever, I actually hit my weekly word count goal of 5,000 words. As a reminder, I like to count a week as Monday to Sunday because I think that's more sensible. After all, Sunday is part of the weekend and not the week start. But anyway, for the week of March 3rd through the 9th, I wrote 5,711 words, which brings the project total to 85,051 words. Assuming I actually stay on target, I'll be hitting the 100,000 word mark in a few weeks, and I think I'm going to make a dedicated writing update video about that. I also plan to go more in depth about how I outline, maybe how I structure a scene, what to do if the scene you outlined doesn't sound quite right when you actually start writing, etc. Also, a friend and I were recently talking about how a writer even decides on the actual length of a story they want to tell, so I think I'll kind of include that discussion in that video because I think it'll fit nicely. But with that out of the way, let's get on to today's writing workshop topic. This week, we're talking about dialogue. Dialogue is a cornerstone of storytelling. Whenever you have two or more characters talking, which happens quite often in all forms of media, you have dialogue. In a colloquial sense, the term dialogue can also refer to a single character speaking aloud, whether alone or to a crowd, or even internally. Technically, there are a lot of different terms for different versions of speech. So when a character speaks to an audience within the story without interruption, that's technically a monologue. When a character speaks aloud, but to nobody except the audience in real life, that is a soliloquy. But if they're not talking directly to that audience, then it's just kind of them thinking out loud, where if they're talking directly to the audience, realistically, then it's a fourth wall break, and so on and so forth. These terms all matter much more broadly in theater productions, the stage, especially soliloquy. But to make this discussion easier, because I don't feel like going back and having to talk about each term individually as I'm moving through this video, I'm just going to lump all forms of characters talking into the term dialogue, just for convenience sake. Now, a question for the audience. Have you ever gone to work or school or any other social setting and made it through a whole day withholding your true thoughts about a topic, and instead you answer with relatively benign statements that serve as a Trojan horse to deliver your true intent, which is a passive-aggressive remark that you can plausibly deny as intentionally offensive? I'm going to assume yes, you probably have, which means you at least have some sense for realistic sounding dialogue. Good dialogue is really hard to make, bad dialogue is really easy to make. The tricky part is recognizing that what we call normal dialogue in real life might not work very well in a story, because unlike real life, a story needs to create continuous momentum. Hi, thank you for interrupting. In real life, you learn a lot about a person just by watching and listening to them speak. You can see things about them from their mannerisms, their quirks, their cadence, etc. Obviously, I talk with my hands a lot. And the same is true for storytelling, and dialogue is a fundamental pillar of that character development. Of course, that doesn't mean a story even has to have dialogue, but it's one of the best ways to allow characters to directly express their thoughts and ideas and feelings to other characters or even just the audience. Meaningful dialogue also helps move a story along, as characters can engage in conversations that both advance the plot and develop their relationships with other characters, both positively and negatively. What separates story dialogue and real life dialogue is how much filler you can get away with. In real life, most people tend to go, like, duh, when talking at length, because those filler segments act as little buffering sequences for our brains while we're mid-sentence. Real people also make small talk more often than is necessary, in my opinion, because some of us just want to sit in silence and not have to talk about the game last night. Although as a consummate Midwesterner, I will absolutely talk about the weather at length when I need to fill time, because people need to know that the cold really wouldn't be that bad if it weren't for the wind. Generally speaking though, audiences of any storytelling medium don't prefer to see these types of filler conversations. If two characters meet and talk and take half a page just to make introductions to each other, you're probably gonna get pretty bored. Dialogue in stories needs to be meaningful. The deeper a conversation goes, the more engaging the story becomes. A discussion about ideals is more interesting than one about the weather. Usually. It really just depends on how you structure a scene and a dialogue sequence. Small talk certainly is a way to develop a character's mannerisms and personality, but a mere sprinkling is all you need. Definitely not nearly as much as you find in real life when you're trying to talk to a stranger or a coworker at work or anything like that. None of that's to say that you can't do small talk well in a story, but it very much depends on the length and genre of your story. A short story should have as close to zero filler dialogue as you to manage. Whereas a bloated 1,300 page book like Wind and Truth might be packed with way more filler dialogue than is necessary, leaving you confused how an editor wouldn't want the author to make some cuts. It also depends on the setting and the scope of your story. If you're writing about a specific place on Earth, you might want to have characters engage in small talk that sounds authentic to what you'd encounter in real life in that real place. Again, this can be done well in the beginning of a story to insert seemingly mundane dialogue into a story that acts as a little sleeper agent of foreshadowing for events later on. On the other hand, secondary world fiction doesn't need to follow the same conversational habits we encounter in the real world at all, and you might have no need for any sort of small talk. One of the many things I like about the game Space Marine 2 is how overly serious and down to business all the characters are at all times. Their dialogue reflects that as well, with most sequences being relatively short and immediately to the point. Either way, small talk can for sure be included in your story, but like all dialogue, it needs to serve a purpose rather than simply existing for the sake of it. Sounding realistic isn't always the best idea because at the end of the day, a fictional story is inherently not real, and progressing the story is more important than giving your characters time to talk about the weather just for the sake of it. The real meat of dialogue is expressing characters' feelings and ideas. Characters drive stories, and the more fleshed out your characters feel, the more engaging the story will be. Of course, there's a fine line between drama and melodrama when it comes to dialogue. When a story is melodramatic, the characters can feel more flat because their dialogue is focused on being more sentimental and often fulfills a cliched version of a character archetype. I want to note that melodrama isn't always bad, particularly if you are writing for the stage. But outside of that realm, a story or character being melodramatic is largely seen as negative. As with all writing advice, I can't really give you a surefire way to create meaningful dialogue because there is no one way to do so. Instead, I suggest you really dig into stories you enjoy, regardless of genre, to find dialogue segments that you found compelling and start asking yourself why those sequences work. What kinds of questions do characters ask each other? Do they discuss their thoughts and feelings, or the physical action going on around them, or a combination of both? Are their emotions openly stated, or do you, the reader, have to glean what they're thinking through subtext? Is the topic itself the main purpose of the sequence, or is it a vehicle to discuss a deeper meaning? What kind of physical mannerisms or internal monologues are woven in with the dialogue? Even though I talk largely about book writing, I find that looking toward visual mediums can be extremely helpful for this exercise, especially film, as you have a lot less space to fill, and therefore you have to be a lot leaner with your dialogue. Some movies that I personally find as great examples are Interstellar, Princess Mononoke, and Everything Everywhere All at Once. Those are some of my all-time favorite movies, and I really like them, so I'm gonna plug them whenever I can. For TV shows, two that immediately spring to mind are Arcane and Scavenger's Reign, which are both absolute masterpieces in their own right. Now, they are both animated, so if that's not your jam, you might have a harder time getting into them, though I think it's always worth branching out of your comfort zone for learning purposes. I'll also take this opportunity to talk about Chained Echoes, which is a German RPG styled after the classic 16-bit games of the 80s and 90s. Every bit of dialogue is impactful in that game. Whether you're in a serious moment or a comedic one, the plot is always being advanced, and you're always learning something new about the characters and their own stories and their own growth together as a party. And it's kind of that found family type of trope, which I always love. Also, I'm probably gonna make a video about the game sometime in the future because it's amazing and everyone should play it. And the more people who play it, the more likely we are to get a sequel, which is my absolute dream right now because I love the game. I think it's one of the best games I've ever played. And in fact, possibly one of the best pieces of media I've ever consumed in general. So not to set the bar too high, but it's really good. You should go play it. Anyway, I know this video has just been kind of me rambling about dialogue and not really giving many tips or ideas because it really is the thing that you just have to go look at dialogue, like I said, that you like in a book and figure out how it actually works and then start thinking how you can either mimic it, tweak it, make it your own, and then that'll help you grow your own skills. Of course, I hope that this provided some measure of help, or at the very least, amusement. And to wrap this up, just remember that dialogue is quite possibly the hardest aspect of writing to master. Making characters sound authentic is a huge challenge. And as with everything, you just have to keep learning and practicing and growing. And if you do that, eventually it will start to click, I promise. Also, remember that going through multiple drafts is a normal part of the process. So if your dialogue doesn't sound good on the first draft, that is okay. You can make it better in the second draft and beyond. But I think that's it for today. If you liked the video, please like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Leave a comment below if you have any thoughts about dialogue or have other constructive tips to share. If you have questions for me about dialogue, I think I'm gonna try to make a little goofy skit video in the future to kind of give more ideas of how to actually put dialogue into action. So if you'd like to see that, let me know. Also, I won't be posting a video next weekend because I will be out of town and I have a lot of late nights coming up here this next week of work. So I just won't have time to make a video, but it's not because I've given up on YouTube again. As always, I hope that you have a wonderful day and I'll see you here in the next video.